Well, Judy, I think I'll go ahead and kick us off. So, good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Annette Maggi, and I'm the Executive Director of the Retail Dietitians Business Alliance. Um, we have, over the past 6 to 8 months, started to partner with Judy Dodd just in regards to offering programming and education for students, because we know retailers are always looking for a great talent pool. And we also know that students, dietetic students, don't often get exposed to retail as a potential career path. And so we're really working on multiple fronts to benefit both students and introducing them to this really interesting side of the profession, as well as to retailers in building a talent pool. So, as I mentioned, we're partnering with Judy Dodd on this effort. And Judy, I was thinking this morning that you have kind of the trifecta for me. You've been an academy president, you've worked in the retail setting, and you've worked in academia. So, you're really the perfect partner for us on this. A couple of months ago, Judy led a panel discussion just about careers in dietetics for us. And one of the topics that came up during that session, Judy, if you remember, was about ethics and how do dietitians in retail manage ethics and work within their ethics, given that, there's so many different products sold in the grocery store, right? Everything is sold in the grocery store. So today we're thrilled to have three really great dietitians with us to address this issue. Molly Hembree is at Kroger and is with us today. Judy Chodirker is from Canada and at Loblaws, and so we think that brings some really unique perspective in kind of moving across the border and how do ethical guidelines play in Canada. And then Yvette Waters is in California, and Yvette, I always think super interesting stuff around health happens in California, and how do you manage all of that within the code of ethics, right? So I'm going to turn it over to Judy to kick off our panel. Judy.
Hello, and I guess it's Judy D and Judy C today, but I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to be here because of the ethics issue too. What Annette didn't mention, I was also the chairman of ethics for the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. So I will tell you, yes, they do enforce the code of ethics for both members of the Academy, students who are members, and for anyone who's registered because CDR does it too. On the other side of it, in my years of working with ethics, only one person ever lost their identity as a registered dietitian and at being able to use that credential. So it's not like they're out to get you. Just know that a lot of what the code of ethics is to make sure that the public trusts us. And that's what it's about. Now, what I have put up on the chat board is my address at Pitt so that I have two really good handouts. I'll be glad to send you. Just send me an email and I will send it out to you. I'm glad the students are here. Teaching at Pitt, that was one of the things I taught was ethics. So very quickly, I want to go over the key points. And knowing that, yes, I was in retail, I worked in my favorite job, quite frankly, was working as a retail dietitian. And just up front, know that when I started to work for the retailer, I also made sure my contract allowed me the opportunity to keep within the code of ethics. That was in my contract. So I'll tell you that right up front. Although I will say, in my 11 years of working with that retailer, I was never compromised. I ever feel that they weren't protecting me as a registered dietitian while I protected them as a retailer. On the other side of it all, the major points that you're likely to deal with on working with retail is something Annette already talked a little bit about, and that's products. How do you position yourself? And we'll talk more about this a little bit later. But how do you position yourself? Remembering that, again, the code of ethics, and I'm assuming you're getting that through your college or university or internship. The code of ethics is meant to protect the public. That's the point. And evidence based is our first point. So a lot of the ethics codes that you will look at, again, can you come up with evidence based information when you're recommending or advising a client. That's number one. The second thing, and I have to bring this up because I'm sure our panelists are going to say this too, we are dealing with a society that social media is a big deal. And social media and the whole idea of how do you present yourself as a registered dietitian? How do you present yourself within the frame of dietetics uh, with evidence based, especially when it comes down to working with the pharmacist, working with the chef, working with the public, working with the retail salespeople. You have the ethics behind you, and that's an area that's very important. And the whole idea of principles and standards is integrity and being able to do that. The third thing I want to bring up is something that you will run into in every area, but definitely in retail, and that's COI or conflict of interest. Disclosure is a major issue, and I would really hope that you've gotten it through your university or program. But read what it requires. And if you notice, every one of us, when we present something these days in a PowerPoint, usually we'll have a disclosure area. I tell people every time I do a presentation that I worked for a retailer. Why? Because, in fact, they need to know I'm going to bring that retailer up. That retailer is still dear to my heart. But on the other side of it all, they need to know that out there. Sorry, guys, but it does come out to the fact that disclosure is a very important part of this conflict of interest. Recognizing it, and that regardless of whether you go into retail or not, pay something attention to it. We will talk a little bit about Canada, but I will tell you a uh, I do have something on my resource list on international. And this is another area of dietetics we have to think about. International, but also state to state. I worked in Pennsylvania and Ohio. I had to join into the licensure disclosure in Ohio because the way Ohio's licensure was very different than Pennsylvania's. You need to recognize that there is going to be that need to think about not just international, but state to state. What does licensure require? And that gets back to what's your credential. And you know, even though you're a dietetic student right now, you are not eligible RDE. That's not allowed. That's illegal in terms of what we're talking about with ethics. So think in terms of, now you're a student, you're going to be registered, but licensure and where of the states you're going to be working with it. Which gets me to the last of the points in this whole idea of telehealth. You need to pay attention to what the guidelines are for recognizing what you can do and what you can't do. Starts with the evidence based, but it also goes with this whole idea of crossing state lines, international lines. Again, reading more from the Code of Ethics. No, it's not great fun, but you will, in fact, learn a lot more than you're going to learn from us in this few minutes. Now, I'd rather turn this over to our guests who are living the dream, I guess, and who will give us a chance to really talk about what it means. And again, I go back to the fact that as a retail dietitian, I never felt compromised because I had it in my contract. My employer supported me. And there were times that I had to step back and say, hey, I can't represent this group. But they understood part of my contract. So think in terms of that. Having said that, I'm going to move right on to our discussion questions. Uh, First of all, I'm going to ask each of you to give us an overview of your role as a retail dietitian. And I'm going to start with Yvette. Yvette?
Judy, and good morning. It's 7 a.m. here. So for myself, I'm the Nutrition Strategist and Brand Influencer for Raley's. We are a regional grocery store chain. We are privately owned. Have about 130 30 stores right now in Northern California and Northern Nevada. So definitely different licensures expectations for our dietitians between Nevada and California. And I'm glad that you brought that up. But for myself, corporate wise, I oversee all nutrition strategy, all health and welfare initiatives, work interdisciplinary. So I work very closely with my leadership team, but also our merchant or buyer team, quality assurance, legal, operations, and we all work together when it comes to our initiatives.
Thank you. Molly.
Hi, good morning. So I'm Molly. I am a retail dietitian coordinator for Kroger Health. So technically, we're the healthcare arm of Kroger. My core responsibilities are to deliver what we term telenutrition visits. So those telehealth MNT visits across different state lines for sure. Other responsibilities I have are also to be involved with developing and delivering media-based presentations. I do a lot of content writing for blogs with our Kroger Health website, as well as Live Naturally, which is our print magazine, and Vitacost, which is our supplement company. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
This thing is a nutshell. We're all nuts. Okay. Judy.
Hi, good morning, everybody. So I'm an in-store dietitian at Loblaws in Canada. I have 2 stores in Toronto area. For those not familiar with Loblaws, it's the largest retailer in Canada with over 1,000 stores across the country and a number of different banners. So it's a very big company. I started, I believe there were 8 or 9 dietitians, and we now have close to 90, which is probably the biggest employer of dietitians across the country, which is really, really exciting. And our program has constantly been changing. But in a nutshell, to use Molly's phrase, we are, as an in-store dietitian, I'm responsible for the health and nutrition for customers and colleagues within my 2 stores, as well as supporting the community. Most of our services are paid at this time, and we do some free services within the store, but we do one-on-one counseling. We do webinars. We have a whole new webinar platform. We do presentations for companies. In non-COVID times, we're in the store more, and we're meeting with customers on the store floors, answering their questions, doing demos, and that kind of thing. And we're also responsible for basically our own marketing within our communities. So we wear a number of different hats to promote our services within our communities. And we also all work on working groups for the head office. So I do some blog writing for PC Insiders. I'm working on webinars. So we do a number of different things within the role, which make it so interesting.
I would agree with you, Judy. And I think that's probably why that was my most interesting role, because it's a combination of marketing and education and just about anything else that comes down your path. So students, all those courses you're taking make sense. Understand you need some experience to go with it. Let's move on to the second question. And this one's a little bit more. We're going to ask you to name the challenge situation you've encountered at retail related to the code of ethics. Some of you already sort of brought it up. And do you see this as a situation different you may have encountered in another dietetics position? And I'm going to start again with Yvette.
Thanks, Judy. Really going first.
I'll switch it up.
Echo. These are some really good points, and kind of like what Annette was saying. With California, there's a lot going on here. It's very big. It tends to be, there's a lot of desire when it comes to customer expectations when it comes to health and wellness. So exactly to what you were saying, it's a really, really delicate balance. So an example would be something like on a state level, they're doing Prop 12 coming up here in the next few years. And that's going to, since 15% of the market of pork comes into California, the entire nation is going to have to change their practices with gestation crates. It's very expensive to do that. That's going to affect the price And that's California really pushing these type of things. So when talking as a team, it's important to take all of those into consideration. And what I do on our level is I'll take the science that's there, the existing versus the emerging, because we get asked all sorts of things, and put those together. And then I'll pull in the teams such as quality assurance, such as legal, outside perspectives to other dietitians, and we'll put together a brief to then talk to our leadership team. The important thing that I've really noticed is having the dietitian in the room as a conversation, because we haven't always been able to be in that room in the past. And so having us in there to provide our expertise, really to provide our input and to provide our recommendation and discuss with them when this is their business decision as a company, but really discuss with them, hey, here's the information on it. And it's really important for us to be as transparent for our customers as possible to provide them an informed decision. So there's a lot of talking in that with being ahead of trend, but also navigating through that existing science. And it's providing both perspectives in our realm of things is what I've noticed a lot of.
And what you're saying, I'm sure the rest of us will say too. I will say in my own practice, I was fortunate enough to be in central office, so I had the voice. But if you're out in the winters, out in the area, you may not have that. So having a leader who understands ethics becomes a part of it. Let's move on to Judy. I'm going to let Judy say something here.
Yeah, I think there's a number of different areas. I think the one that may be unique to dietitians that comes up is related to promoting different products. So when there are, new meal kits or various other sort of lines of products that they would love to get the dietitians to promote for them, we may or may not be willing to. And I think that what I had to learn as a retail dietitian is it really comes down to the fact that we are dietitians first. We are responsible to our college of dietitians. As you mentioned, Judy, it's a legal entity and we're responsible to the public and in what we say and what we promote. And so we always have to fall back on that, um, that we are dietitians first. And I think that was always an issue as well with a lot of healthcare providers. There was always a bit of a barrier. Oh, we're not going to promote, retail dietitians because they're just going to promote their own products. And I think we've come a really long way, as I think many have, in terms of showing that we are dietitians first. And we may have our likes and the products that we like the best, but my overall goal is to teach consumers to make their own choices based on their own needs. And yes, we may promote certain products, but any community dietitian would do that as well based on what they believe are the best products for their clients. So I think you always just have to remember that you're a dietitian, you're regulated, and you have to fall back on that. And I do think we have a lot of support in the company. Things always come up. And I think another way that I've learned to look at things is that sometimes there is a way to promote something within the ethic and within our own beliefs that may not be quite as strict. So, for example, I always talk about everyday foods, which is your everyday Health Canada foods, your basic foods. Those should be maybe 80% of your diet. And 20% are what I call your sometimes foods, right? If we have a healthy diet, they can include cake occasionally or brownies or, white bread or whatever it is. And so sometimes it's giving that kind of message as well, that maybe this isn't a meal kit that's healthy for you every day, but once in a while for a quick, easy meal, it's okay within the context of a healthy diet. So I think sometimes there's different ways of looking at things as well, that still have a healthy perspective and put things into perspective.
While I have you, Judy, what about Canada? Is there a difference here at all in terms of code of ethics?
Yeah, so from what I could tell, and by the way, they are fairly short documents in both countries. Canada's is quite a bit shorter than the States, but I was surprised that they were very short documents when I went to remind myself about them. The principles are really very, very similar, which are non-maleficence, that is doing no harm, maleficence, doing good, autonomy of the client, and justice or respect.
Yeah.
So basically, those four principles are the same for both countries. The States uses the term justice, whereas Canada uses the term respect. But when you look at it, they're really very, very similar. So sort of nice to see that in terms of we're seeing things eye to eye in terms of the ethics in dietitians.
Yeah.
Now, again, I'll
I
point out, as
mentioned,
you did, Judy, that
yeah,
here from province to province, it is also can be different in terms of the
exactly.
regulatory. Not all provinces, as far as I know, even have a college. Ontario was the first one quite a few years ago, and most have followed, but there's also even different legal terms. Registered dietitian is not a legal term in every province. So, like you say, from state to state, it can be different. From province to province, there can be big differences as well, which is quite confusing.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, I did put up, I do have a handout on the International Code of Ethics. I actually worked with Canada on their Code of Ethics. So
Ah,
right there. Molly, let's go back to the question on the challenge you faced.
Yeah, well, my comments kind of tag on to Judy's thoughts with this, in that challenges I think that kind of more subtly present themselves on a really regular basis is having to always balance the products, foods that we recommend that are based on sound nutrition, benefit to health, but then also putting in there our knack as a retail dietitian that we're product experts, and also delivering sound MNT practice. So it's always having to make sure we have that good, yeah, again, balance of knowing that there's certain things that are going to be probably ideally the best for given, situations, medical conditions, etc., but then always being very tailored and customized to that patient or customer. So I find, with regular telenutrition sessions we have, certainly when I was physically in the stores and talking to our customers one-on-one, and also my first role with Kroger is I was working through our customer service center. So I was talking on the phone all day to different customers across the whole country. So it was always having those two things to kind of make sure that we're considered whenever I'm making a suggestion or a recommendation. And we have a lot of different influences, and I know we'll talk about that here today, different influences as to what things we want to, emphasize for different people in their diets, as well as things that we really are going to make sense for their lifestyle. So if I'm working with somebody and their number one thing is they're like cramped for time, they like have, busy lifestyle, their family has all these different preferences in the home, I probably wouldn't be, advising some culinary inspired things that are going to take like a really long time. Okay, like, maybe I'll meet them in the middle, and we'll establish some good products that are going to give them some good things that they're going to focus on with the ingredients, but at the same time, it's something that they're actually going to be able to make and enjoy. So I think it's just always kind of capturing that sort of balance.
That's an ethics issue that we all have to look at. Can the customer afford it? Can they access it? Do they have the resources? That's a whole other area that I honestly have spent a lot of time on in the last few months, even though I'm not in a retail setting. Molly, do you want to continue on? Because our next area is this whole area of promoting brands or products that aren't part of healthy eating. Judy sort of picked on this, but do you want to continue on that? Do you have any examples or ideas you want to add?
Yeah, there are, specific, I guess you could say there's definitely parts of the store that might offer certain kinds of things that we'd like for people to shy away from, maybe the candy aisle, things like that. Alcohol, I guess, also included in that mix. But I think just, for example, if there's something like an indulgent product that also is like allergen free, like on the one hand, it's really great to have options for things that are yummy treats that are going to be suitable for someone that has like a peanut allergy or a need to avoid dairy. But then on the other hand, there are foods that a dietitian would typically not want to have emphasized in the diet. So those would be like an example of a type of product. But at the same time, because I want to actively advocate for everyone, I don't want, maybe to highlight chocolate as being a core, type of thing or some other indulgent thing to include. But we do want people to be able to enjoy food, with their family and to not have to worry about food allergies or an anaphylactic reaction happening if they're baking cookies in the kitchen or something. So, that could just be, types of brands or types of products where they're appropriate, but also not things that we just want to add in just for fun if it's not something that is necessary in a
The
situation.
National Nutrition Month theme this year really helped on that with that idea of personalize your diet and the whole idea of all foods fit in moderation, but what's moderation kind of thing.
Right.
We can go that route. Yvette, you want to continue in this vein?
Yeah, absolutely. What moderation? I know an example would be I don't work with product promotion as much, but more recently we've had vendors reach out for us to talk about on digital realms because of COVID and not having samples in our stores. And I had a product that was more pediatric focused, and they were providing me a bunch of talking points, and they were talking about, hey, talk about the trace elements and how it affects brain. And I respectfully declined those type of talking points because the science wasn't there. So I let them know, you know what, I appreciate it. This is interesting research, but it's just not sound enough for us to be able to talk to these points. Here are the points that we're comfortable doing. And really encouraging my team in the store level to do the same thing, because we get asked that a lot in one of our concept brands of, well, if you're so healthy, why do you sell alcohol? But we go back to and it's like, okay, fair point. But at the same time, the 2020-2025 dietary guidelines do not say eliminate, they do say moderate. And we talk about those elements of things and really just like, how do we navigate those customer questions of, hey, you're pulling out this brand, but I really like this brand. We might suggest an alternative and look into the ingredients, look into, hey, there is some dietary fiber in here. Here is a little bit more protein in here, and talk about, we're not going to eliminate full categories, but here are other alternatives. And the nice part is, at least for us in retail, is we see the brands and we see the products that some other realms of dietetics, such as working clinical, they don't know much about the products on the shelf or how it's constantly changing. And so we can at least speak to those and have our team be empowered by trying those and doing education for their team members on the store level as well, because they're the ones talking to the customers as well. So providing those talking points and knowing when to respectfully decline if the science isn't there is what I've noticed.
That's probably the hardest part that I had to deal with when the science isn't there, and it may even be something I love. But let's go back to that. Judy, did you want to add anything more? Because we sort of jumped from you over. Do you have anything else you want to add to this part of the discussion?
I don't think so. I think that's been pretty much covered. Do you want me to
Okay,
move on
then
to the
let's
next
go on.
question?
Yeah, the next question is on one that's heavy duty on weight. Consumers use different methods of weight control, weight loss. Not all approaches are used by individuals with scientific validation. And in fact, that's something that we deal with, trying to deal with other people who work in our stores, right? Let's talk. Let's go on with how do you handle it? How do you manage the situation, both within your store and with our clients? Judy, I'm going to let you go on with this one.
Yeah, I think this is a really important area that also I think I've developed skills over the years to deal with these kinds of things, because I think it is difficult. I'm thinking of Yvette in California. It must be even worse because there's so much information on the internet. There's so much misinformation on the internet. And people have very strong opinions about food and nutrition and what they believe in. So you have to tread lightly, as I think Yvette had said earlier. And I think I learned that, at least on one-on-one counseling, or even, just somebody you meet in the store, with sort of using motivational interviewing, when somebody tells them what they're interested in doing, and you say to them, are you interested in my opinion about it? And usually they'll say yes. And you can provide the evidence for or against. And I think, again, with the ethics, it's our duty to point out both the risks and the benefits to any particular, diet or, activity. And ultimately, again, that respect and the ethics, it's up to the client to decide if they do it or not. I don't necessarily have to support them in that, but it is your goal to go through the benefits and the risks. And my point of view is always, if something isn't truly risky and it's not going to hurt somebody, if they want to try it, that's fine. I might tell them it's a waste of money, it's a waste of time. Chances are it's not going to help them, but if it's not going to hurt them, that's their, decision whether to do it. If it truly is something risky, then that's a different story, obviously. So I think that's really sort of, you have to take a step back and not just jump in and put somebody, on their back to defend themselves and their beliefs. So you have to do it very carefully. But I think for many people, they very much respect it, because they understand that you're basing it on the science, and they may or may not agree, but they will still take your opinion, um, to consider it. And I think also that depends on all of your views. I tend to approach things, even weight management, with a HAZE approach, the health at every size. And so when I take on clients who are interested in weight management, I always let them know, what my approach will be and why I take on that approach, because long-term restrictive diets simply don't work, but they may have a chance if they simply focus on their eating habits, and over time. So again, I think it's being upfront, but also treading lightly, that you're not imposing on people, and then the risks and benefits.
And I think probably we would all agree. I always send them back to their medical team. Have you talked this over with your doctor? Of course, I may not agree with the doctor either, but that's another whole issue, and I'm not going to put myself in that. Yvette, you want to add to this question?
I completely agree with all of that. A couple of things, like Judy had said, food is extremely personal and intimate. So we kind of focus on meeting our customers where they are, start to develop that rapport. And then one thing that we have noticed is asking consent to provide information. When they're a little bit more open to a conversation, that's where, kind of like Judy had said, maybe we just change one thing. Maybe, hey, we won't mess with your food at all, but let's try drinking a little more water. Like something as small as that, or focusing on stress management. Instead of taking away somebody's food at this moment, maybe diving into a different realm of health and wellness, just to share that we're not the food police, because we do have to deal with that. But like looking at those different realms and asking for that consent, we've found people to be more open to hearing our recommendations, to have that conversation, and they'll have a little takeaway, do it for a couple weeks, and then they'll feel comfortable enough to come back to you and keep that conversation going, to kind of create that lifestyle change. Because at the end of the day, we are trying to do a behavior change, which takes some effort.
I think we'd all agree too. It's a big difference if somebody walks up to you in the aisle and asks you a question versus somebody that's in a group you're teaching or a food demo you're doing. Knowing that customer and recognizing that part of our interaction with the dietitian is something I think we all take to account. Okay, how about you, Molly?
Yes, to just echo Judy and Yvette when it comes to how I think we have to remember that, well, unfortunately, this isn't the way I wish it would be, but, a lot of the times our customers are coming to us as a last, maybe resort. Unfortunately, they're kind of desperate. They've tried to lose weight on their own, and they're feeling just lost. So I think having that empathetic, compassionate approach when they come to us, and being able to truly hear why they're wanting to do this, what ways that, we can work together to help them hit their goals is a really important piece of this. And yeah, motivational interviewing, reflective listening is going to help with that. And then I guess, for me, I definitely have come across a few patients who have been greatly, dramatically under consuming calories, like under 1,000, under 800. So they report to me. And then certainly those kind of scenarios, I think it's especially important that you bring up those risks and, talk about the sustainability of your eating patterns. So, yeah, I think there's just certainly a layer of empathy and understanding so that they're open to talking to you about change with this.
It's that empathy that becomes the big issue. Molly, while I have you here, there's a question for you on you're vegetarian or vegan. Uh, how does this impact your communications? Does it impact it? Are you going to be honest with us?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I personally, yes, it's a good question. I am personally vegan by choice. It's been actually almost 10 years now, so it's been a while. But I will say, all of us have different reasons for eating definitely the way we do, whether it be, avoiding or emphasizing different foods based on things like allergies or sensitivities, certainly like for religious reasons, different medical conditions, et cetera, even its impact on the planet, the way we eat, whether we're talking food waste, carbon emissions, animal rights. So I actually don't really talk to, my patients or my customers that I am vegan. I don't share that information. If they were to maybe do a little bit of like research online, they may be able to find some information about me being vegan if they were to see any interviews maybe online. But I haven't actually found it super difficult to be able to mesh, nutrition evidence, all that we know about the dietary guidelines for Americans in my plate, and be able to also speak to highlighting plant-centered choices. I mean, if you do kind of break apart the dietary guidelines in the My Plate, you're going to see there's a really hefty amount of things that are plant foods that we might not realize, are definitely plant foods such as fruits and veggies, whole grains, nuts, seeds, beans, fortified soy products. Those are all things that happen to be vegan and are the majority of our plate. So hasn't, I don't think, been super difficult to just emphasize those things. Now, certainly my expectation when I work with people is not to have to be, vegan by any means. I actually even use materials that reference animal-based ingredients like meat, poultry, fish, eggs, dairy. But then what I usually find myself doing is I'll always also mention an alternative that's plant-based. So like if there's scrambled eggs, I could say you could also do scrambled tofu. Or if you're using Parmesan cheese, you could also use nutritional yeast. So just mentioning the alternatives there. And I think something that's important, and especially for this, this conference, is that we don't want, of course, our customers to be leaving our store buying less of our products, thinking that they have limitations on what they can buy. So I definitely don't feel like that happens because you're still getting so many options in our grocery store. If people aren't purchasing those animal-based ingredients and they are choosing to be more plant-centered, there's so many private and national label products on our shelves that I find that you would be able to just as adequately fill up your cart with plant-based things as opposed to animal-based things if you chose to do so.
And your point that plant-based is really not just a recommendation of the dietary guidelines, but also the American Heart Association, American Diabetes Association, the Academy. I mean, you don't have to cross that line. I think the important thing is what you said, though. Somewhere down the line, as the in-store dietitian, you have to be able to talk about meat. You have to be able to at least answer those questions. We have a question I want to bring up to all of you. Judy sort of took care of it online, but let's ask it anyway. How does somebody find you in the store, Judy? You already posted, but let's tell the whole group.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and it's definitely a challenge, especially now. Things have changed a bit because we're not in store that often. Um, but I think our management has really understood now that we all need to have a home within the store, that we can't just do counseling in a department manager office, or, we need a private space. We need good internet. Um, and new stores now, I'm happy to say, always have a dietitian office now. So that's a huge win for us as dietitians. That being said, the majority of our stores do not. We typically will use the pharmacy space, but that can be an issue as well, especially now that they're doing COVID vaccines. There's no way we'd be able to get in there. And some people have been able to, develop a space that they can use for themselves, but it's a huge issue. So that's something that's ongoing, but looking positive for the future. We do have a booth, and it's placed in different places, depending on what you decide with your store manager. Um, but we can provide information there. And so even now that I'm working mostly virtually, I do go into the stores, every week or two, just to make sure there's materials out there and that kind of thing. People love recipes. So that's a great way just to promote my services as well. And any specials or promotions that are going on. And the pharmacy also for many, is a good promoter. So we will often piggyback with them if we do have a particular, something going on, or if they have patients that they think would benefit, that they can refer as well. So definitely a challenge. And now that it's all moved online, we are allowed to have our own social media. So we have our own Facebook accounts and that kind of thing. And something that came up earlier, that we all had to change our names, so that's very clear who we're working for right off the bat. So mine is Judy C at Loblaws. So people know right away that we are a retail dietitian, and we do have very strict what we're allowed to say and not allowed to say. But still, it has become a big promotional feature for many people online, but it's a challenge.
Judy Dodd, there's a great question from Deanna in the chat, and I'll just read it. So she's just asking if each of the panelists could touch on examples of how you evaluate products and research, and when you feel you need to exclude a product vendor request. I think it's a great question. Molly, you want to start?
Well, I guess I would say, if there's certainly, like we've referenced today, any outright, I think, contradictory to evidence-based information that we feel comfortable being able to, highlight and emphasize with recommendations to our customers, that would be a red flag. I do think, kind of as we've alluded to today, I think verbiage is a very big part of our role. The all foods fit approach, and that, we're all going to end up probably at some point wanting, at least in some form of moderation, all these different, yummy, tasty, attractive items. So I think it would be, how, for instance, like a very specific example might be if the request was to highlight a food that kind of would be recognized as a sometimes food or a limit food, like Judy had phrased it. And if that was like the core of like a meal plan, like maybe they wanted that to be present with every meal or with every snack or something. Well, that wouldn't really be kind of the look we'd want to have when we're trying to consider all different food groups and the way to put things together. So that would be something I'd be like, we need to either rework this, or we're going to have to back out of that promotion.
I can give an example when it comes to like a fad diet per se. A couple years ago, let's talk about keto. That's an example of something. It's a macronutrient type of diet style that was very, been around forever, but very much so not in the trendiest way as it caught in the last few years, and how everybody was using it was very different. But in California, they were demanding to know more about it. And it's still one of the most shopped icons that we have at shelf, which is very interesting to see. So with the leadership team kind of demanding a definition for it. So I took, it's a very difficult multifactorial type of diet, how do you take that down to a product level and make a definition for it? So consulting out with other dietitian teams, working with an agency such as BestCom, who works with our shelf labeling, talking to their dietitians, talking to our legal team, talking to a team to say, okay, here's a definition that can fit on an umbrella type of scope, but also having that disclaimer, really having those talking points of, and having that information behind it to be like, okay, if you're asking for this, let's look at the whole picture of what keto friendly is, what's the disclaimer behind it, kind of like our disclosures, things like that, and trying and suggesting it's really, really, really important if you want to do that type of diet to see your healthcare provider, to work with somebody who's a little bit more in tune with the evidence of that. But we get asked those type of questions all the time. Myotoxins in coffee, things that aren't necessarily in that has strong existing research behind it, but how do you create talking points around it?
Don't have much to add to that. I think it's just all looking at the guidelines, right? So we'd be comparing, something to Health Canada guidelines and looking at the nutrition facts, whether, if it's something that has a lot of saturated fat or, 70% sodium, which you do find on these things. So it's sort of crazy. And again, how would that fit into a healthy diet or not? Um, so there are even simple things like, recommending that people use less sauce. You don't necessarily, usually the sodium, for example, would be in the condiments or the sauce. So you probably don't need as much if that's something, that you're concerned about. So usually it's just related to the guidelines, the general healthy eating guidelines.
Okay. Uh, Yvette and Molly, do you have anything to add here on how to find you in the store? Judy had her say we did have a question on that. Molly?
Like how to find us, you said, Judy? Sorry. I personally am not physically in a store anymore. As of the last year, our team has completely been remote, delivering telenutrition visits and doing other digital everything. So to find us, we technically our site is Kroger.com/dietitian. We're also building some things within the Kroger banner site. So but yeah, I can certainly type in my email as well if that would be helpful. Wouldn't mind some questions if anybody had any after today.
So we'll find you. How about you, Matt?
And much like Molly, I'm not physically in the store since I kind of work on a corporate level, but people find my email all the time, and I'll definitely put that in the chat as well. And then for the dietitians that are in store, kind of like Judy said, in one of our newest stores, we do have a dietitian room, which was a big win when you're looking for real estate on the floor. But also we have this it's called the SE Health, which is our Something Extra Health program. That's what our program's under. And it's a kiosk or a booth, and it's actually like they built a house. So we have a little house that our dietitians kind of work in. They also have a press a call button for assistance if they're running around the floor. They have headphones in that they can run over there. But it's a central point that you can push the button and they'll be right there. So having utilizing those headsets have been big for some of our bigger format stores as well.
So Judy and team, I'm going to jump in and just.
So I'm and thank the 39 people who joined us. This is great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Judy, and thanks to the team. I mean, I think this has been a really great discussion. I think ethics and the balance of it, I mean, what I hear over and over and everything you said today is that dietitians are really finding that balance of working in the retail setting, promoting foods, doing more to promote those foods that align with health recommendations. I remember one time Jane Andrews, who had been at Wegmans, had said, just because the product's in the store doesn't mean the dietitians have to promote it or do promote it, right? There are some products in the store that you would never promote, and that's understood. You're trying to really focus on those that are better for you. But I think this conversation about ethics is one that could continue all day long, honestly, because I do think we continually bump up against situations in retail, whether it's with internal staff or with shoppers, that require us to really balance this and walk this fine line and communicate to people why. But it's really the value that dietitians bring to the retail setting of making sure that what you do is science-based and ethical, but also that consumers can come to that retailer and trust that retailer, right? And that's a big piece of this, of you do so much to maintain that customer loyalty and that role that the retailer can play really in filtering information and making sure that it is aligned with science. So thank you everyone for joining us this morning. The keynote session will kick off at 11 Eastern, so 5 minutes to 11 Eastern, it'll show up in the sessions. Thank you, Yvette, Molly, and Judy for being with us today, and we'll talk more soon.